Welcome. Good evening. I love seeing all of you here. Welcome to the second presentation of our JFK 60 series that's presented by the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of North Texas and JFK expert Dory Wiley. This evening presentation was originally scheduled to be a three-person panel made up of individuals who were present on the day of the assassination. We had Mike Howard, who was working as a Secret Service agent, and we had Keith Shelton, who was working for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he was actually in JFK's motorcade. Unfortunately, due to health reasons, neither one of them will be able to join us this evening. We have shifted from the three-person panel to an intimate conversation between Dory Wiley and Dr. Norman Gant, who also was present the day of the assassination. So it should be a very wonderful evening with lots of fascinating information coming out. So we will let Dory and Dr. Gant have a conversation, and then we will also have time for questions for Dr. Gant. So keep your questions towards the end. We will have a microphone and we'll come to you with the questions that you may have. So I would like to welcome, before I do that, I want to acknowledge a special group of people who have traveled near and far to be here this evening in support of Keith Shelton, who could not be here this evening. This is a great group of individuals. Keith Shelton was a professor at the University of North Texas for many years in the journalism department. He was also the first editor of the North Texas Daily, which is the newspaper of the University of North Texas. So these individuals that have traveled here at this front table, they came in support. They were his students, they worked at the NT Daily with him, and they really look up to him. So he couldn't be here, but I want to say I hope that although you couldn't connect with him at this event, that you're able, while you're here in Denton, that you're able to connect to him at a different time. I know it will mean a lot to him and help in his recovery. Also attending is Dean Andrea Miller, who is the Dean of the Mayborn School of Journalism. So Keith is a former faculty member in that division, and she's also here in support of former students of that department. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. Norman Gant and Dory Wiley.
Hello, Dory. How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Would you call me Norman?
Oh, I will. It'll be very difficult.
Well, it's a little easier if we just refer to each other that way.
Well, that sounds good. Give me a second here, and then we'll get started.
Fine.
So, so glad to see you all again. How many of you were at the first event? How many of you were not at the first event? Okay, great. We'll start all over. There's 6 of these, so this could get really repetitive after a while. Now, how many of you were able to go to the Texas Theater, Dealey Plaza, and the 6th floor? Good, good, good. Well, we're trying to, all of these are different, and some of them will be a little bit sequential. This one's not sequential. We talked about having a live panel. I told you the first night when I first started doing this, some of my interest, I'm kind of a historian. I thought about Lincoln. You know, how many of you been to Forest Theater? And you ever sit there and wonder, wow, if I had the chance to visit with a doctor that worked on Lincoln or some of the witnesses there, you know, how great that would be. And of course, you know, none of them are around. But here we had this incredibly tragic event in Dallas, and some of them are still around. Now, we had 2 witnesses not make it. Stephanie called me and said, well, do you have some more witnesses? Oh yeah, I've been using them for the last 10 years. And I called, well, I looked up several of them, they weren't around anymore. And then a few of them were sick or had gotten Alzheimer's. The next thing you know, and I thought, looks like we're having a one-on-one conversation.
You got it.
And you know what? We couldn't be luckier. I actually would prefer a one-on-one rather than a panel because we can make it very personal, and we're going to turn you loose tonight. So it'll be terrific. So the first, now while we're here to talk about the JFK assassination and the events that you were involved in it. What I don't want to undermine or dismiss, I want to make sure the audience fully appreciates, is your full medical background and history a contribution to medicine here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and probably nationwide as well. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and your history?
Well, I'm a graduate of University of North Texas. That's
Go
the
Mean
first
Green.
thing. I went to school at North Texas for 3 years. Got into medical school after 3 years, but came back, took my 2 American history courses, and got my degree. I'd promised my mother I'd get a degree, so I did it. And
that was in biology.
do what?
Was that in biology?
Biology,
Yeah,
a minor in chemistry.
okay.
It was pre-med, and when, you'll love this story, any of you remember Dean Gafford? See, nobody's as old as I am. He was the dean at North Texas, and they interviewed all the candidates that were applying to medical school. And he said, we don't let 3-year students be recommended to medical school. So I had been warned, and I took out the catalog that I used when I matriculated. How about that? And I said, so you lie? And Dr. Carrico looked at him and said, Gafford, I think he's got you. So I got to go to medical school after 3 years.
That's quite the accomplishment. So tell us about going to medical school and your practice thereafter.
Well, my mother must have been frightened by a lab technician or something, but I fell in love with research while I was a Parkland resident in OB-GYN. And it seemed like everything I did in the lab just turned to gold. So I stayed to do research, and proving that no good deed ever goes unpunished, I was then rapidly promoted to chairman of the department, and that's where I worked for all those years. I was at Parkland for 50 years.
Wow, terrific. Well, thank you for serving. That's terrific. And OBGYN, that's probably why I never ran into you.
Well, you know, somebody asked me why I did OB-GYN. I said I got tired of watching young men die. Here, it was a happy outcome. 50 more years for the mother, 70 more for the baby. Weren't many people who could say they'd get 120 years of survival. I could.
That's fantastic. I like that. All right, tell us a little bit about November 1963. Where were you working?
I was a senior medical student at Methodist Hospital in Oak Cliff.
In Oak Cliff, okay.
On a senior rotation.
Yes. And how long had you been there?
Well, since the beginning of November.
Oh, okay, so you had just moved down there.
It was a 2-month rotation.
2-month rotation.
I was there for November. I believe it was November and December.
So what were you doing that morning?
Scrubbed in surgery with a first-year surgery resident named Paul Mullinoff. And we were listening to Muzak in the background. And we were running a little late because we got started late. And he said, Norman, go drop out and get us a late lunch. So I went and called the cafeteria to get a late lunch and came back in, and he was closing the skin, okay? So you're going to hear some surgical terms tonight, and I hope you're not too squeamish because some of it may upset you. I'll just tell you now. But anyway.
No pictures.
No pictures. But we heard that there had been a gunshot sound in Dealey Plaza, and that possibly the president had been wounded and was being taken to Parkland. So he said, "You hungry?" I said, "No." He said, "Let's go turn on the TV." And we went into the doctor's lounge and turned on the TV. And the chief resident, we were there maybe 10 minutes, and the chief resident, Sonny Cardwell, was paid stat. That means short statum for Latin. So liberal education does help. Stat, which means get your fanny to the emergency room. And Sonny wasn't available. He was off campus making nurse rounds. So
Is that what they call that?
that's what I'm calling it, okay? Anyway, we went to the emergency room, and you couldn't, in the trauma room there at Methodist, you couldn't step for the people wall to wall. And a police officer stretched out dead on the table. And this officer said, "Which one of you is Dr. Cardwell?" And I swear to God, Paul Mullinoff, who was the resident, said, "He's tied up." And I thought, he might be.
Poor guy had to live that down all these years.
But he said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "I'm Dr. Mullinoff, and this is Dr. Gant." Now, when you were a senior medical student, they could call you doctor. But I, to this day, answer to "Hey, you." So I just want you to know that. So he said, "Okay, I want a bullet out of that stiff."
Who said that?
This man who was in charge of the room.
Was he a policeman?
I know, he was in plain clothes, and I think I don't know who he was. To this day, I don't. I think he was probably a U.S. Marshal. Mm-hmm. He wasn't Secret Service, I don't believe. But he was definitely in charge. And Paul said, "Sometimes you can't get a bullet." And he said, "Well, then you give me a knife and I will get a bullet." I mean, he wasn't taking any no's. And I said, "Paul, we don't have a permit for an autopsy." And he did this. And I was looking at the butt of a .357 Magnum. And I didn't want to argue with him at all. And he said, "I want a bullet." And Paul looked at the nurse and said, "Well, maybe." Officer Tippett was shot 3 times here, and we didn't roll him over. He had also been shot in the back of the head. We didn't get to see that. But he asked the nurse for her scissors. She said, "I'm not going to give you my scissors, Dr. Mullinoff. You never give them back." Whereupon this guy with a cannon in his armpit said, "Bitch, give him your scissors." He got the scissors. He got the scissors.
Okay.
And she said, "If you don't give them back, you're a dead man." And I never will forget, he had on, it was warm for November, but he had on a heavy blue Dallas uniform, like a Dallas uniform. It was blue, kind of like this. It wasn't the khaki, it was heavier. So Paul started cutting that off and opened up the shirt, and there was a flank hematoma. He had a big bulge in his flank that was blue, which was a big wad of blood. And Mullinoff said, we may can get a bullet. And he looked at the nurse and said, "Get me a cut down tray." And she said, "When you give me my scissors back?"
Evidently, this had been a problem for her in the past.
Yeah. Well, doctors were known for stealing nurses' scissors, okay. Nurses always needed scissors. So anyway, she came back. A cut-down tray, let me explain, is a little shallow tray, like a little shallow pan that's stainless steel. and it's it is a scalpel and the blades, hemostats and suture material. And a cut down is when you do this to get access to a vein. You open up a big vein, like right here in your arm. Everybody knows this vein right here is a favorite cut down site. The ankle, posterior tib, anterior tib are cut down sites. And you would get the blade and just, you'd sponge off if you had the time. If you didn't have the time, you'd just make an incision, lift up the vein, nick it, put in a catheter into which you would run fluids. And in trauma, you always had an upper and a lower in case you weren't, unless there was a wound preventing blood from getting back to the heart. This way you got fluid to the heart, or you got blood to the heart if you had to transfuse. It's just the step. And he cut down, and I just held the cut down tray. This is my sole contribution to history. I held the cut down tray. I didn't do the surgery. Paul Molinoff cut down, and a big wadoma came out. Well, I would say a double handful of clotted blood, and behind the clot was a button, and behind the button was the bullet. The bullet had taken a button through in front of it into the flank. Things like that do happen, and
this bullet that hit the button, my understanding is very damaged.
the button had a wedge out of it.
Yeah.
But it was intact minus a wedge. But it had a wedge out of it. But it had taken it all the way through.
Okay.
And Paul took the button and said, "Here, sir, he took the button, put the button down, took the bullet, and said, "Sir, here is the bullet," and the guy dropped it. Now,
This marshal or whatever he was dropped it?
I think he was a marshal. Molinoff, I didn't know at the time, I do now. The chain of evidence is very important. And Molinoff put his foot over the drain because the thing that the officer was on was a table with pipes, 4 pipes coming down, and an open drain. And Molinoff put his foot over the drain and said, "Nobody move." And he said, "Everybody sees that's the bullet." He reached down, picked up the bullet, put it in his hand, and said, "Don't drop it." And he said, "I'm not going to haul your ass out of here." That's exactly what he said to Paul Molinoff. I was never so glad to leave anywhere in my life.
Did he have everyone leave the room?
No, he had us leave. The 2 docs.
But everyone else stayed.
I don't know. We got the hell out of there. And we got off.
Did he mark the bullet in your presence with any initials?
He didn't mark it with his initials. I didn't see do anything
Okay.
other than take the bullet in his hand, which he squeezed, and he said, "Haul your ass out of here," to Paul Molinoff. And boy, we left. Yes, sir.
And that was it. One bullet. He didn't have you pull out the other 2.
We couldn't have
3.
found the other 2.
Yeah.
We were just, this just happened to be fate that this one. This thing's where you see in the movie and they pull the bullet out and they drop it in a pan and it goes clank. That's in the movies, okay? I only got to do that once in my whole career at Parkland. A superficial bullet that I actually asked the nurse to bring over a tray so I could go click. And she almost killed me when she found out why I wanted the pan.
You know, I had no idea these bullet removals were so entertaining for you guys.
You had to find something.
Can we back up a second here?
Yeah.
So you've left us hanging. You leave the room. There are other people still in the room. So what happened after you found out later? You talked to those people, I presume.
Yeah, he was taken to the medical examiner's office. I know that, but I don't know who took him. I'm only going to tell you about what I know and what I witnessed. And all I know is he was taken to the medical examiners.
What about, can you tell us secondhand? Talk to some of your friends that were in the room and what they said?
No,
You're not going to say anything?
I just didn't hear anything after that
Yeah.
because he was dead and the family was grieving. And I mean, here's a man who got in his uniform and went to
Sure.
work in the morning and did a traffic stop and was killed at a traffic stop. I did hear the woman who observed Officer Tippett being shot. She heard the police car stop. Officer Tippett stopped the car for a traffic violation. And she looked outside and she actually saw him being shot and called the police. And that's why the police got there so quickly. And he abandoned his car and went to the Texas Theater. Now this part I know because I talked to the police officer who apprehended him in the Texas Theater. Somebody saw him walk up to the theater and there wasn't anybody in the little, what are they?
Glass window.
Glass window. So he went straight in and they reported it. So the police knew that somebody walking had gone there. So the police descended on the theater. A couple of them came in the back way, and this officer that I talked to sitting in the emergency room at Parkland drinking coffee, 10 years later, said, I walked up and tapped this guy on the shoulder and he whirled around with a pistol. And he said, I did what I was taught to do, to grab the pistol like this so the hammer would hit him here. He said, I had 3 strikes where he was trying to kill me. And then the other 2 guys smothered him down. And that's how he was apprehended in the theater. That part I know because the guy who lived it, he told me this story in the emergency room.
Yeah, he's been very public about that story. Tell me this, did you post, let's go back up a little bit. You leave the operating room.
Do what?
You leave the operating room because he tells you to get out. Where did you go?
Well, let's get this straight. We weren't in an operating room. We were in the emergency room.
Emergency room.
Yeah. We went back upstairs and sat down and turned on the TV.
And that's what you did the rest of the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, Dr. Cardwell came back, so we got him caught up.
Did he have any rope burns or anything?
No comment. I've already said too much about Sonny. Sonny was a
Well,
good
Stephanie,
surgeon.
we're going to have to add another program and invite him on. He sounds like he had a nice day too.
But I do know what went on at Parkland. And if you want me to go up here at this little diagram,
Sure, that'd be great.
all of the people involved at Parkland, including 2 of my medical students, they're now gone. And there are only, I guess, 3 of us left. I think Paul Mullinoff and Ron Jones, who's chief of surgery at Baylor University Medical Center. And we're the only 3 still left from that day. But if you will, I'd
Well,
sketch.
there's Ken Sawyer's still around, isn't he?
Do?
Ken Sawyer?
Ken Salyer is still around. But Salyer, I don't know about Salyer.
I've had him on a program before. He was in
Okay.
there as well.
No, Ken was my resident when I later rotated on his service.
And then
Ken
did you
was
know
a
Don
black-
Curtis?
Who?
Don Curtis? Okay, yeah, he was in there as well. And
Well, the ones that I'm gonna talk about are the people I knew.
Okay.
And if this is a little disjointed, please understand that I got their stories over the period of time. Most of my source was Jim Carrico. Dr. Carrico was his father. He was chairman of chemistry at UT at North Texas. And Jim was ahead of me in medical school, and we were in the same medical school fraternity. And Jim was the surgery resident. He was a second-year resident, and this is the emergency room outlined here. Here is the driveway, and here is where the limo pulled up with Kennedy in it, and the governor. And Carrico got a telephone call in the emergency room, in the doctor's room right here. This is surgery's doctor room. This is OB-GYN's doctor room. This is the OB-GYN area. This is surgery. This is medicine, psychiatry, and x-ray. This is trauma room 1 and 2. That's trauma room 3 and 4. Carrico got the call here. He turned and started through here. This was the triage. This is where people signed in. He looked over at the doctor sitting here, Bill Midget. Dr. Midget practiced OB-GYN in Denton for 25 years. Some of you ladies may have met him. Anyway, Jim Carrico said, "Midget, come with me." So Midget just got up. He thought somebody was delivering. And they came out here, and the gurneys were lined up here. And they picked up a gurney, went here and out here. And Midget said, "I got out there, and the president was there with his head blown off, and the governor was shot, and we loaded the president on a gurney." They then went up the hall, pulled in here, into here, and put the president here in trauma room 1. And what did Midget do? I asked Midget, he said, "I got the hell out of there. I got the hell out of there in a hurry," went back to the OB-GYN area. And in case somebody once asked me how I'd avoided all this not being found out, I kept my mouth shut and my head down. I was like Midget. I didn't say anything. I was told by one of these professors, you medical students ought to keep your mouth shut. And that's what we did. Now, this is trauma room 1. That's where Kennedy was. And Carrico established an airway. That's what he called it. I got an airway for the president. He intubated him. Do you know what that means? He looked down his throat, put a tube into his trachea, his windpipe. And I assumed that he did the tracheotomy. He did not. Malcolm Perry, a senior surgery resident, Mac Perry, later a faculty member at Parkland, Mac Perry did the trach. They did the cut downs, arm, leg, and they did the trach. And the professor of anesthesiology, Pepper Jenkins, Dr. Jenkins was there with a fellow, and they were at the head of the table, and they weren't moving air. Even with the tracheotomy, they weren't hearing air being in and out. And sometimes when you do a tracheotomy, you can get the pleura, that's the lining over the lungs, and you can drop the lungs. It happens. In the best surgeons in the world, it can happen to, because the pleura comes up higher on some people and lower on others. And if you get the pleura and you drop the lungs, you're not ventilating. So what they decided to do was to put in chest tubes, one here and one here. Ron Jones, the chief of surgery at Baylor, was a senior resident. Ron Jones put in a chest tube on the right, and Charlie Baxter, and I'm not making this up, our chief of urology at Parkland was Paul Peters. I'm not making it up. And Paul Peters and Charlie Baxter put the chest tube in over here. Now, in the meantime, the governor's over here. My classmate, Herman May he rest in peace, saved the governor's life. He saw the exit wound, got an adaptic, a kind of an oily, greasy dressing, put over the wound, put a compression bandage on and a cling, like gauze, and covered up the exit wound. And then Red Duke, remember Dr. Red Duke on TV? Well, Red Duke came in and put in chest tubes with Herman May into the governor. Now, the governor had an entry wound here, exit wound here. He was seated, so when he took the shot here and it came out here, it nicked his wrist, broke his arm here, and lodged in his thigh, the slug. And Red Duke and Herman May literally saved the governor's life. And I'm proud to say that the governor handed me my diploma the following spring.
Oh, that's cool.
Walking across the stage.
That's awesome.
We were at SMU. We were too poor in those days to have our own auditorium at Southwestern. We do now. But we used SMU's auditorium for our graduation. And we had been told we would go this way, and instead we went this way. You know why? The governor's best side was this side. And he had pancake makeup on because he still was pale as a ghost. And he wouldn't turn loose of my hand. And he said, "You're from Wichita Falls." "Yes." "Do you know Judge Allred?" I said, "His son, Sam Houston, and I." Now, Sam Houston got that name because he was born in the Sam Houston bedroom when his father, James V. Allred, was governor of state of Texas. And James V. Allred served as a mentor for LBJ and for Governor Conley. So he wouldn't turn loose my hand, and finally I said, "Governor, I've just got to know if there's a diploma in this tube." But anyway, all right, now this is going to be a little gruesome, folks. Okay. They finally decided they weren't moving in the air, and they looked at each other and they said, "You know, he's dead." And about that time, Kemp Clark, who was about 6'6", he was the chief of neurosurgery, came in the door, said, "Where's he shot?" And Carrico said there was an exit wound in his neck and the back of his head, but I don't know if it's an entry or exit wound. And Kemp went over and picked up his picked up the president's head. He had thick hair. And there he saw the skull missing, looking into the ventricle, and part of the cerebellum gone. He was very dead. And he walked over and he unplugged the respirator. And Jim Carrico said, "Kemp, that's the President of the United States." And Kemp said he was the president. Now the next part is kind of tear-jerky, and one of the men also in here was Bob McClellan. He was the highest up in the surgery department that day. The chair of surgery was in Galveston. that day and wasn't at Parkland. And Bob McClellan was, when he heard the chair being paid stat for the emergency room, went down there. And Bob was at the head of the gurney where the president was. And the pump, the respirator was right here, and Bob was standing here. The president's head's this way, and his feet are this way towards the door. And Mrs. Kennedy had asked them not to declare him dead until the priest gave last rites, which the priest did. And everybody, after they unplugged the respirator, they started filing out. And Bob was the last one there, and he had to move the gurney. And Mrs. Kennedy came in, took his ring off, and put it over her finger, leaned over and kissed the dorsum of his foot. Is probably the only place that didn't have blood, or, and walked out the door. So that's what went down there. Sunday or Saturday morning, what happened downtown? My classmate, Fred Bieberdorf, was the jail doctor that night, working at the jail. That was a choice job for a senior medical student. You got paid to be the jail doctor. They didn't have a real doctor. They had a senior medical student. And he was just leaving when he saw Oswald get shot. And he did the CPR on Oswald that kept him alive till he got to Parkland Hospital. Now,
He was in the ambulance?
yeah, he rode in the ambulance and doing CPR. Now, if you're going to kill somebody, you don't want to shoot them anterior, posterior. You want to shoot them transverse. You do this because I know what the chief of surgery found. Got the spleen, got the vena cava, avulsed the superior mesenteric artery off of the aorta, clipped the gallbladder and the liver, and went out the side. That was a fatal wound, and being a trauma surgeon like our chief of surgery was, he had the bleeding controlled and had a heartbeat when he arrested and died on the table, and he couldn't be resuscitated. Other than that, that's what I know.
That's like the old saying, other than that, Miss Lincoln, how was the play?
Yeah.
You know, appreciate you sharing that. I've had the privilege to interview quite a few of the doctors over the years, and it's one thing for some of us to talk about it and whatever it is, but it's a whole other thing when people are present, because they still, every one of them got emotional. They get emotional, and it just means a whole lot more. So we appreciate you being here today and sharing that. And I think, you know, we mentioned this before, you know, everyone in here, if you're around then, but everyone here knows what they were doing that day. And that's still an emotional moment for you personally as well, too. You know, just like 9/11 or anything else. So anyway, that's terrific.
I do have one little follow-up.
Okay.
I didn't tell anybody I was involved. Fred Bieberdorf and Herman May, the two medical students. Herman May was the one that put the dressing on, and Fred did the CPR on Oswald. We were advised by Charlie Baxter, professor of surgery, to keep our mouth shut and our head down. That's what we did. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell Jim Carrico. And I got a call.
Did you tell your wife?
I did. I did tell my wife. and threatened her with all kinds of that I didn't want anybody to know. And because Charlie Baxter, I love Charlie. Charlie, I later delivered some of his grandchildren, and I did surgery on his wife. And Charlie and I were compadres. We just kind of bonded. He was the burn doctor at Parkland, and I rotated on his service with Red Duke three times. Why? I asked Red that one day, how did I get stuck with you 3 times? He said, I asked for you. I said,
Well, he's not shy. He's very personable.
No, well, Red's dead.
Yeah, I know.
Jimmy Red is.
Yeah.
His name was James Duke, but we called him Red. Anyway, where was I? Lost my chain. Oh, yeah. So I got a call one day. I was now still a professor at Parkland, but I was the executive director of the American Board of OB-GYN. We're the people that do the exams. And they had to get past me to say they were board certified, and I was a sweetheart. Okay? But I ran these exams, and I moved the office to Dallas when I took over. And I got a call from Carrico. And Carrico said, what the hell do you have to do with the Kennedy assassination? I know you weren't at Parkland. I said, no. I said, why do you know I'm involved? School Book Depository had gotten my name, and they wanted to interview me. They have interviewed me. I said no the first time and refused to be interviewed.
When was that? When they first asked you?
That must have been 15 years ago.
Yeah. So,
And I just was keeping my head down.
yeah.
And Carrico said, Norman, they are reputable people. They're historians, and they won't. So they came out with a little camera and a recorder, and if you want to see this interview, it's at the School Book Depository.
Yes, they have oral history at the 6th Floor Museum, and you can go down there, and they have hundreds and hundreds of witnesses like this, and they've done a really good job of recording history. And I've actually sent some people down there as well, and sending a few of our people that are doing this series down there as well. So tell me this: you kept your head down, you know, and I would say most of the doctors did. Most of them didn't really talk. Kind of started in the 90s with the Assassination Records Review Board when they did so much autopsy study. They started interviewing some of them, and Dr. Perry and whatnot. You still didn't talk at that time.
All I did was hold a pan.
No. As a researcher, you've already given me a lot of information.
Well,
There was somebody in the room that we don't know who it was, and he was directing things. Who was that guy?
who was what?
Who was that guy in the room directing things?
In that room,
Yeah,
that day?
in your room.
I don't know who he was. Do you?
No, but I'll start digging.
Boy, I tell you, he was not in a mood to be fooled with.
Yeah, he didn't seem like somebody you want to go on a world
He
cruise
was
with.
not being cuddly and sweet, let me tell you. When he showed me that's the only permit you need, I just thought, boy, you've already popped off once too often.
Well, and you never got with anybody in that room that was in there with you that day and talked about that day?
No, I tried to. Now, I did call Paul Mullinoff before I gave the interview for the School Book Depository. I called up Methodist to find out where he went into practice, and the acting director of evaluations was a member of the OB-GYN department, our faculty member. And he said, well, Paul is a radiologist in Cleburne. I think it was Cleburne. So he gave me his number, and I was able to find Paul. And I tried to contact Paul to get him to come here tonight. I don't know if he's still alive. I know he's retired, but I couldn't find him. I tried, but
You know, I interviewed one doctor that had been in trauma room 1 with the president. And his story basically was after he was interviewed, if you will, by the Warren Commission, that and threatened and so frightened to talk about it that he moved away from Dallas. He never came back, and he never talked about it again until he came to one of my conferences about 5 years ago, and he had a prepared speech.
and this was who?
Don Curtis.
I just didn't know him.
Yeah. But he never talked about it either. So, you know, there were several of you guys that didn't. So we appreciate you speaking about it.
The reason I'm doing this is my cover was blown when I did the interview for the school book department. Carico was the one who talked me into doing that.
So if he hadn't have done that, you still wouldn't be talking about it. Does this make you uncomfortable right now?
No.
You don't think that marshal's going to come in, do you?
No, it's almost 60 years, for God's sakes. That's history. There are, as near as I can tell, 3 of us left, and every year my Rolodex gets thinner. So I don't have much to protect anymore, you know. There are no secrets left. All the things everybody and a lot of people who claimed to be there weren't.
Yeah.
And that always troubled me, deeply troubled me. And I will tell you though, one more time, I was sure glad to get out of that trauma room. That guy was serious, whoever he was. And I'm certain he wasn't Secret Service, because he had to have been a U.S. Marshal, because I don't think he belonged to anything to do with the Dallas police.
Yeah, sound like a marshal or a FBI. One of the two.
That's a possibility.
Probably FBI.
That's a possibility. I just assumed he was a U.S. Marshal.
Yeah. Questions? And we need microphones. You know, come right up. Pick somebody. There's one right here, and there's one back there. Hands high. They're looking for you. There we go.
It's coming your way.
Doctor, thank you. Thank you for being loyal, conscientious, and focused on the truth, for focusing on the facts. So I have a 2-part question, both directed at you, Dory, and Doctor. They're both about the bullets. So I want to start with the bullet you saw extracted from the officer. So the first question I have tied to that is, this man you've been referring to, you don't understand who he is, maybe U.S. Marshal, maybe FBI. At that moment, did you have any thought that this officer was possibly shot by what we think is now Oswald, and therefore this officer was tied to possibly to the assassination of President Kennedy?
We had no idea he had anything to do with the assassination, much less. We just knew when we went in there was a police officer dead.
That's what I thought.
And that's all we knew. Your mind can do 1,000 things, but what we actually knew was we had a dead officer and this authority figure wanting a bullet.
So you never at that moment thought this could be tied to President Kennedy?
No.
When
thought
did
so.
you find out? Later that day, the next day?
No, I found out about it like everybody else when the guy was arrested. Oswald was arrested.
For watching the television?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
And I left that night to go interview in Little Rock, Arkansas for an internship. Thank God I didn't go to Little or Small Stone. I didn't go to Small Stone, but I went for it. And we were in a car listening to the radio. There were it was a 2-seat roadster, and I was in the jump seat in the back like this, all the way to Little Rock. But we listened to the radio, and that's when I began to put some of it together.
That's what I thought. So the second part of that first question is, when he dropped the bullet that your peer doctor gave to him, what made him drop it?
I don't know.
It's odd that he would drop it after he was so insistent to get the bullet.
He just didn't close his hand or he turned it over. I just saw it drop. And there wasn't any doubt. Mullinaw put it in his hand and he dropped it.
You think he dropped it intentionally?
No.
Because your doctor did the right thing.
I just think he was
to protect
Probably slippery.
the evidence.
I just think he was clumsy. And, you know, I saw it fall. I didn't see it come out of his hand, but I saw it on the way down, hit the floor and rolled towards the drain, and Mullinaw put his foot over the drain.
Thank you.
Which I thought was fast thinking.
My other question concerns the second bullet. You have been very unwilling to share things you don't know about, but I would appreciate your opinion. And Dory, I'll ask you the same question. We hear about the magic bullet theory that hit President Kennedy and how possibly could not have traveled the route it traveled. I would appreciate your opinion on the magic bullet theory.
I can't even give an opinion. As we used to say in the military, that's above my pay grade.
You didn't come to the first night, did you? We covered it. But I'll tell you what, if you come to the next one, I've got a guy doing for an hour and a half, all ballistics, all of that stuff. So we'll cover that then. We've got one in the back.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just wanted to clarify. Ken Salyer was my medical partner, and Ken died in 2020.
Wait, I didn't catch that. What did he say?
I didn't hear
We're
that.
both
Ken-
wearing hearing aids.
Ken Salyer was my medical partner.
Oh, okay.
Ken died in 2020.
Oh, he did pass away.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I kept trying to call him on a cell, and I kept getting somebody that kept hanging up on me. And I thought, well, he's mad or doesn't want to talk to me anymore or what. So thank you for telling me that. Great guy. You know, last time I interviewed him was at the Texas Theater. We had an event there. I don't know, did you come to that? Yeah, and I don't know if you remember me doing that, but he got very emotional talking about it, and I'm sure he did, you know, with you. And what a great guy, and another guy with a change the world resume in the medical field.
I got to tell you about Ken. He was mean as hell.
He was nice to me.
You were not his intern. I was.
Well, I always thought that was kind of like fraternities and pledges. They kind of hated you guys when you were going through.
No, Ken was a super surgeon.
Yeah.
Absolutely exquisite surgeon. And even more than that, he was a good doctor. He took care of his patients. And he worked me as hard as he could to make sure his patients got good care.
Well, appreciate you're here today and telling us that. Another question.
Thank you. My question is, why do you think they asked you not to say anything?
I didn't catch that. One more time.
Why do you think they asked you not to say anything?
Oh. Why did they ask you not to say anything?
to protect us.
From what?
We were
Protect you from
medical
what?
students, for God's sakes. And if you want to really get people steamed up, just tell the public that there were medical students taking care of the president or the governor. That just wouldn't have gone down too well in those days.
Yeah, they just grabbed who they had. Don Curtis had gone to dental school.
You know, Charlie Baxter, I love him, and Charlie's gone too. I loved him But that's the best advice I ever got. Keeping my mouth shut and my head down and just staying out of the fray. And that's what it is. You are familiar with all of the theories, and I don't have a single theory because it's over my pay grade.
Well, there's two theories on that. One, stay out of the limelight, or otherwise you're going to be peppered by press from now on. And also, it's probably not classy, and it's not respectful of the family, and it's not professional, etc. Then the other one is, if you're a conspiracy person, you don't need to talk, or you could get rubbed out.
Well, let me tell you
right?
what it's like to have been identified. Jim Carrico was identified, Word, newspaper, everything. Every November 22nd, his phone would ring off the walls. It was somebody somewhere in the world calling, wanting to talk to him. He never had a moment's peace.
Did Ken get calls all the time? Yes. All the time. McClellan, Perry, all of them.
There's
Question.
The Secret Service, several weeks in advance of the president visiting a location, does all of their pre-visit stuff, and you would think they would have worked with Parkland to say, this is the location that if anything happens, we are bringing the president. You would have thought Parkland would have had their best people there that day in case. So why is it that students were the ones who did all of this?
Well, the chairman of the department had a long-standing commitment to be in Galveston, but he left unbelievably competent people. Bob McClellan was probably the very brightest surgeon I ever met in my life. He's skilled beyond belief. Charlie Baxter was 2 years as a medicine resident before he became a surgeon. He had the top surgical faculty in the United States. He didn't leave it uncovered. The place was covered with competent people. Pepper Jenkins was the chairman of anesthesia. He was also my father-in-law's classmate from Galveston, class of 1940. So the chief of anesthesia, the associate chief of surgery were still there.
Well, Parkland's been known for his trauma skills forever.
Forever. The world isn't round, it's sloped. And at the bottom of that slope is the Parkland emergency room. Trust me.
Well, I bet it feels that way.
And it can handle anything that comes its way.
Yeah.
Thank you for your insights and sharing with us. It's horrifically appreciated and insightful. I used to teach as a faculty member at a university in Pennsylvania. And one of our common standard operating procedures now is after a traumatic event is to have a debrief. While you had direction from the chair to keep your head low and quiet, did you have a full-fledged ethical board's debrief for any of those people that were involved in the emergency room for those events?
I didn't catch it all either. Oh, a debriefing. Did you have a debriefing or interview from police, a medical board, Warren Commission? Anything?
Nobody.
No one.
Paul Mullinoff, the resident who took the bullet out of Officer Tippett, he testified at the Warren Commission.
Okay.
No, we just hid, and they just forgot about us as conveniently and as fast as they could. I can't begin to tell you. I don't know what the public would have thought to hear there were medical students taking care of the governor and the president. At the time, it was just the best for everybody, but especially good for us not to be involved. Can you imagine taking me as a senior medical student, and I joke and I laugh and I try to get you not too serious. I've tried to keep it a little bit light, but that was pretty heavy stuff going down that day. All kidding aside, it was damn heavy.
Did you ever have any nightmares or dreams about it?
No, but I still have dreams about it.
Yeah.
And the strangest, I won't tell you about the dreams. But yeah, I still can occasionally have a dream about it. Folks, that was a tough day.
Tough day. Questions? Any more? Oh, we got another one somewhere. There we go.
So you mentioned that Parkland was a trauma hospital, and it had been for a long time. So why wouldn't they have had multiple ER physicians on duty that they didn't have to use all these students?
They did.
It was a different time. That's a great question. And the reason they didn't have full-time trauma professors in the emergency room, we used to say, how did you learn to do a cut down? I saw one, did one, and taught one. We were pretty well on our own. I thought God was a second-year surgery resident. And it was monkey see, monkey do. You know, when we got to see our professor on Saturday morning at the "You Did What" conference. On Saturday morning, we would present the cases from the previous week. That's when we saw our professors. We didn't have a professor on every corner. There were 5 professors in surgery and 5 in OB. Medicine had about 10. There was not a professor on every corner. And it was a hospital run by the residents. And that was accepted standard of the time. That's not what you could do today.
Yeah, we're all getting a little older and needing more medical care. Can you make us feel a little bit better about how it's done today?
Yes, I will. I can't go to the emergency room at Parkland that I don't have an emergency room professor coming in checking up on me. They have faculty in the emergency room at Parkland and the University Hospital. You can't step for faculty nowadays. And part of it has to do with the litigation.
Liability, yeah.
The liability. We live in a litigious society. And no matter what you do in medicine, people still are rude enough to die on you. And it's only in this country that we think death is an option. And whenever there's a death, there's a lawyer.
Thank you very much for being here. It's so interesting. I mean, I was in the 3rd grade when President Kennedy was shot. And I just wondered about the president having last rites. Was there a priest there? I mean, did it take time? You know, it just seems like nowadays we have a hard time.
I don't know if there was an actual, I wasn't there as I told you. I just know that Jacqueline Kennedy asked that he receive last rites. I don't know if it was the hospital chaplain.
Yeah, there's actually a little gap. They were wanting to say, well, he's dead at this time, and they said, well, wait, let's give him last rites first. And the priest came.
But chaplains, a rabbi can give last rites. It doesn't have to be a Catholic priest. But I'm sure you'd have preferred this being Catholic. But let me tell you, I saw some rabbis do last rites. And they're interchangeable for the last rites if they just say the right words. Good question. Thank you.
Again, thank you all. During last time afterwards, I asked you a question on why Dallas? Why did it have to be Dallas where it was chosen? And you mentioned that Dallas was really the third choice. Would any of the medical facilities in
Why was Dallas chosen for President Kennedy to come to, or if there was a conspiracy, why was Dallas chosen to be
That
shot
I
here?
know.
Pardon me?
He was in trouble politically.
Yeah.
And this was 63, and he was facing a re-election, and he wasn't too popular in Texas. And he came and met with the governor to shore up his chances of being carrying Texas next year. It was purely political. And he spent the night in Fort Worth, where he gave a lecture, whatever he did at Fort Worth. Then they flew from Fort Worth, for God's sakes, to Love Field. But he had Conley to try to shore up his chances of carrying Texas the following November.
Right.
You say you were a senior medical student.
Yes,
How old were you in November of '63?
I was 24.
24. Thank you.
Two more down here. Wait. No, we'll never hear it.
No, I'm sorry, I just lied to you. I was 23. I wasn't until 24 until the following February.
It was one of the biggest stories in American history. Are you glad you were there? You were part of it. Are you glad?
Am I glad? Why?
Are you glad you were part of this story, or is it a burden?
I don't think I'm glad that I participated in it. I just did what I was trained to do. As I tried to explain, it was a different time, and our hospitals, and especially charity hospitals, were run by residents and students. And they were supervised at a distance by faculty. But I'm glad, I can never tell you how grateful I am to have been able to go to North Texas, or North Texas State at the time, and to have been a student at UT Southwestern Medical School. I was absolutely blessed with this education. And you know what I love about North Texas? My tuition the first semester, $39. My tuition for 4 years at UT Southwestern, $300 a year. A year. And I was poor. How poor were you? I was so poor we couldn't afford a father. We had to borrow the next door neighbor. That's our story.
Well, that was set up. I love that question because I've interviewed a lot of witnesses, and there are some that are glad they participated, and for some it's a burden. And that's probably a good question to ask all of them. Go ahead.
My question is similar. So echoing the thanks for speaking up tonight, in the last 15 years, has there been any downside? Has there been any downside to telling your story in the last 15 years? Or is there
Any consequences or downside, people pestering you?
I've only told this story now for the third time in public. The first time was the school book depository. That's there.
Sixth floor museum.
Yeah,
Yes.
the sixth floor. The second time was with Bob McClellan, in 2014. And the reason I remember that so vividly, shortly after this, I got my chest cracked for a cabbage coronary artery bypass. But I've only told this story, this is the third time. So I haven't had a lot of practice at telling it, but I did call to make sure that I hadn't embellished it. I called Paul Mullinoff to tell him that I was going to talk to the school book depository and that I'd been assured by Carico that they were historians and above board, they were professional historians. And I wanted to tell him the story. And I told it to him on the phone, just like I told you tonight. And he said, you nailed it. He said, you haven't added anything. I don't think you left anything out. So that's how many times I've told it. This is the third time.
You know, I'm on the library board, the University of North Texas, and they have this Texas Portal History. Some of them are right here. And this video is going to go onto that portal, and it's used worldwide. And they have some amazing resources at the library. In fact, we have a handout or a sheet or somewhere, maybe it's out front. I have it on my PowerPoint. I'll make sure it shows up in all the next presentations so that you know where to go for these resources. But the library's done a really good job of supporting history and things related to the JFK assassination. They've got some nice collections there, and I love going to board meetings because I can go early and look at some of the stuff.
I've recalculated, I was 24. I've got my shoes on, I couldn't use my toes.
Was that minor in chemistry or math?
Chemistry.
More questions? Got time for maybe one or two more? Somewhere? Stick your hand up higher. Nope. Right here. We got one. Where's our... Go, Stephanie, go.
I'll race you, Jordan. I got it.
I saw on the Ollie site some videos we could watch for tonight for the people that could not be here. And if I watched the right one, it was a Secret Service agent, and he totally believed in the magic bullet. Am I correct on that? Or do you know what, if he had been here tonight, we would have heard?
So are you talking about the recent news of Paul Landis? No, what's the question again? Or Stephanie or somebody help me out.
Well, it was a Secret Service man, and I'm sorry, I can't think of his name right now.
Mike Howard. Oh, that was coming tonight. What did Mike Howard think of the single bullet theory? Well, you know, he was in Fort Worth at the time, but I'm sure he had an opinion, and you'd have to ask him.
Well,
but I'm pretty sure that Mike was not, thought that Oswald was a lone shooter.
Yes, he did, according to the video I saw.
You're asking me what?
Well, since we didn't hear that tonight, I just wanted to know how you would have handled the situation.
I've interviewed a lot of people that believe that Oswald acted alone, and I usually don't get overly confrontational with them. You know, it doesn't, you know, people believe what they're going to believe. You know, so I can argue both sides, you know, and so in the presentations I'll show you some things so then you draw your own conclusions. You know, some things to think about. I would tell you this, do your own homework. You know, some people believe something because someone told it. Some people do believe something because they feel it. And some people do believe something because they research it. And some people research the right things, and some people research the wrong things. It's not easy. It's not easy. More? Are we done?
So I would like to give our sincere thanks for Dr. Norman Gant.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
You
it.
hang tough. I try to, I just had to get some people to laugh because some of these things I was telling were horrible.
We feel very honored that the JFK series is the third audience to hear your story. We appreciate you, and of course, Story Wiley, we appreciate you as well. Thank you.
So let me kind of wrap up here. The next one that we have is on the 10th, okay, and that is Tuesday. That'll be Robert Tannenbaum, and he was the number 2 guy, deputy counsel for the House Select Committee of Assassinations. And I think, well, if I remember correctly, he had the highest rated conviction rate as New York District Attorney's Office in the trials he did. He also writes books about some of those trials that he used to do. He's going to speak, and he wants 2 hours. He says he's got a lot to say. So some of the things that Bob will talk about, he says some of the stuff he's not spoken in public about from the House Select Committee of Assassinations. And as a reminder, that was done in the late 70s. The House Select Committee of Assassinations investigated the assassinations of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and JFK. And so it'll be very interesting to hear from him.
You're right, that is on October 10th, but we have Brian Edwards on October 3rd.
Did I miss? Oh yeah, October 3rd, that's the next one, I'm sorry. So we have some coming, back to back. 10-3, Brian Edwards, and he's gonna talk about ballistics and his thoughts about if there were a conspiracy, here's the evidence for it, ballistics wise. Here's the evidence for multiple gunshots. Here's the evidence and how he thinks it happened. And it's an interesting case from him. That's on the 3rd. And then we don't have one until the 24th. And that's Judith Baker, who was Lee Harvey Oswald's girlfriend in New Orleans. And what we're going to do to her is we're going to ask her questions, like in a trial format. We're going to swear her in, and then we're going to cross-examine her with a real trial attorney. Then on the 2nd of November, I'm going to do the trial you've never heard about, which is Howard Hunt, if you remember him from Watergate days. He was a CIA agent, in a lawsuit against Liberty Spotlight, which was a newspaper tabloid in the late 70s that had accused him of being in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And this is the only trial where we actually got 2 former CIA directors and multiple CIA agents and others on the stand. And we have depositions, we have trial testimony and cross-examination. And for those of you that think a court system is a good way to kind of search for the truth, this is an interesting trial. How many of you ever heard of this trial? So I'm really excited. This is the first time I've done that presentation. And I'm really excited about giving that. I think you'll find it very interesting. And then on the 10th, the 10th, Friday the 10th, University of North Texas has their law school down where the old municipal Dallas Police headquarters were. They got a bunch of money to go there, and to do that they had to preserve where Oswald was shot, where Ruby was jailed and whatnot. And they made a wonderful little museum there, and you'll get to tour that. The problem is it's not open to the public because it's a working law school. So you kind of have to go as a group. Is that filled up yet? What'd she say? You still, okay, because it doesn't hold that many. We can only do what, 80 or something? Yeah, okay, well keep me informed. I've got a bunch of people that would like to go if you guys don't fill it up. But you can't just go down there on your own, so you should go that. And then I'll be speaking at that time, and I can answer or attempt to answer any and all questions about whatever you want to ask, because you can only go in small groups through the tour. Any questions on the program? If not, we'll call it an evening. Thanks for coming out.